What are the iconic buildings of Taipei? Okay, there's the Taipei 101, showcasing very modern Taiwan. There's the presidential office built during the Japanese era, but that's done in a very European style. For interest, however, visual impact and importance, there's nothing to match a trilogy of buildings near the heart of the city. The Yang Cho-cheng Memorial Hall, the National Theater, and the National Concert Hall.
The Taiwan History Podcast, Formosa Files, is made possible through the generous sponsorship of the Frank C. Chen Foundation. Formosa Files.
The Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall is a grandiose, squarish building with white marble walls and a two-tiered octagonal roof of sapphire blue glazed tiles. It's stunning in its simplicity and scale. It's something like 76 meters high, not including the stepped base.
The National Theater and the National Concert Hall are both large rectangular buildings built in the traditional imperial Chinese style. They have golden, orange, tiled roofs with upturned eaves, red columns, and intricate decorative elements, all reflecting classical Chinese architectural aesthetics. Okay, so which hall is which?
All right, if you're standing at the western side, let's say at the giant Liberty Plaza archway, you're looking eastward towards the CKS Memorial, then the concert hall is on the left, the theater on the right. Okay, so the concert hall is on the left, to the north. It has a more intricate roof design.
We're going to focus on the National Theater and Concert Hall. Both buildings are beautiful and iconic, and also very important cultural centers.
Yes, but there's something more. They also represent an important moment in architecture. In many ways, they're the high point, but also the end point of neoclassical Chinese architecture.
Neoclassical Chinese architecture. Okay, we'll get back to that in a second. But also, their story mirrors that of Taiwan's journey from the martial law era to a modern, progressive, democratic Taiwan, the one we live in today. So let's go back in time. The fall of China to the communists, 1949. This results in an exodus of about 1.2 million, maybe 1.5, some people say 1.5 million Chinese people coming to Taiwan. A huge influx of new arrivals at a time when Taiwan's population was about 7 million. Taipei, technically pronounced Taipei, received the greatest number of these Chinese arrivals.
Taipei became very much a Chinese city, and one which promoted itself as safeguarding traditional Chinese culture. In terms of architecture, the following decades were rather forgettable. The architecture is practical, cheap, and temporary. Afterwards, they're going back to the mainland, aren't they?
Right. But the CKS Memorial Hall and the two halls are anything but forgettable. The man behind the three buildings was architect Yang Cho-cheng. I think the correct tones there would be Yang Cho-cheng. He was born in 1914 in China. He trained as an architect and established himself against the backdrop of war with the Japanese, and then the civil war between the communists and the nationalists. Wow, John, not the time I would pick to be an architect.
Well, there's a lot of things to rebuild, but anyway, the end of 1945, Yang moved to Taiwan with his family, and the following year he found a job with the government. However, the violence of 228, the 28th of February 1947, that caused him to flee back to the mainland.
Then in February of 1949, Yang returned to Taipei. For the next 5 years, he was hired as an architect by the American firm J.G. White Engineering Corporation, which did a lot of construction work funded by the United States government.
During this time, he did a few projects which brought him into contact with President Chiang Kai-shek and Madam Chiang. He designed a small church, a chapel for the First Family's residence in Shilin, and he worked on the initial phase of the Grand Hotel on Zhongshan North Road in Taipei. The president and his wife liked his work a lot.
Having the president and his wife like your work, not bad people to have liking your work.
Say that again, yeah. And in 1954, Yang established his own architectural practice, his own company.
Okay, but going back for a second to the Grand Hotel, it's worth mentioning that the Grand Hotel, because of its architectural style, it's done in that classical Chinese imperial style, which would also be used for the National Theater and the Concert Hall.
Right. The hotel was the premier destination for visiting diplomats and officials. And yes, built in the style of classic Chinese architecture, reminiscent of the Forbidden City in Beijing. A number of extensions were added, and there was a second phase. A 14-story high hotel was completed in 1973. That's the Grand Hotel we know today.
I remember seeing that for the first couple of times after having visited China and thinking that it looked rather strange, right, to have such a tall Chinese-looking building, right? But, yep, there it was. But, there's a Grand Hotel in the southern port city of Kaohsiung, right? Same style. First built, actually, in 1957 by the Love River in Kaohsiung. I don't think it's still there today, I don't know what happened to it. But it was also designed by the same architect, Yang. And as Taiwan's economy grew, a bigger hotel was needed, and that resulted in the building of the Grand Hotel we now have in Kaohsiung, which is right overlooking Chenqing Lake. Yang designed a 5-story building in the imperial style, classical Chinese architecture, and the Kaohsiung version of the Grand Hotel was completed in 1971.
So Yang had spent decades working on this new yet old interpretation of Chinese classical architecture at a time when in China the communists were destroying their heritage and building drab Soviet-style buildings. And Yang now, he's ready for his crowning achievements.
Yes, that would come following the death of Generalissimo President for Life, Chiang Kai-shek, on April 5th, 1975, at the age of 87. Chiang Kai-shek had been the leader of the Republic of China for a span of nearly 50 years. The government, following his death, formed a committee for the construction of a memorial hall. And the first thing you got to do is choose a site.
The building site they found was near the heart of Taipei and covered an area of 250,000 square meters, about the size of 5 football fields.
Okay, and what was at that site at the time?
Recently vacated military facilities. The story really starts in the late Qing dynasty, the late 19th century. The site was located outside the city gates of Taipei in an open area next to a military camp, and it served as a training ground for soldiers. During the Japanese colonial period, 1895 to 1945, it was home to 2 military headquarters, I think an infantry regiment and a mountain artillery unit.
And then in the post-war era of the nationalist government, it continued to be used for military purposes, hosting units such as the Army General Headquarters and Military Police Command. But in the early 1970s, the military units were relocated, and that area was planned to be used for urban commercial use. It was designated as Taipei's second business center.
Yeah, fascinating. The plan called for 2 skyscrapers surrounded by some smaller buildings. There would be air walkways with conveyor belts connecting the main buildings, a little bit like, the Jetsons cartoon.
Yeah, a very futuristic vision. But after President Chiang Kai-shek's death in 1975, plans changed. That whole skyscraper Jetson thing was halted. The land would now be used for the CKS Memorial Hall. And what happened to the Jetsons' plan of the skyscrapers? Well, a reworked, smaller version, and no air bridges in this case, was implemented in the Xinyi district, where currently the Taipei 101 skyscraper and the World Trade Center are.
Anyway, this government committee have a building site. Now they need a design. In August 1975, the committee made a public announcement for an architectural competition to design the Memorial Hall.
The design requirements described in the public announcement were as follows. A memorial hall of President Chiang Kai-shek with statue, a concert hall for orchestra concerts and other large-scale performances and gatherings, and a theater for Chinese opera. John, you're a big fan, right? Drama and other small-scale music performances.
And the area around the buildings would be developed into a park.
So building this memorial to Chiang Kai-shek is understandable, seeing as his son, Jiang Jingguo, was then the most powerful man in the country. He was premier, but, he'd soon become the next president for life. But what would be the motivation for these performing arts buildings?
Well, in the 1970s, Taiwan, representing itself as the Republic of China, had taken various devastating political hits, losing its seat at the United Nations and many countries, switching diplomatic recognition from Taipei to Beijing. One of the KMT's strategies to counter this was to promote Taiwan's reputation in the international community in the field of arts and culture. So part of this promotion of the arts was making Taipei a venue for international performances, especially in classical music.
Okay, but back to the architectural competition. It had several stages. From an initial 43 entries, 5 groups of architects were selected, who then submitted architectural drawings and models, and architect Yang Cho-cheng won the competition.
That sounds easy the way you just described it, but the selection process was not exactly smooth. One of the committee members involved in the project was a very senior government official. And his son was an architect and one of the 5 selected finalists in the architectural competition. So it's only natural that he would favor.
Yeah, a little nepotism there. But Yang, though, he had a kind of hard-to-match supporter, and that would be Madame Chiang Kai-shek. She favored Yang's design, and his design was really the only Chinese classical architecture proposal.
Yes, I've seen those designs, those alternate designs, and I think that the right choice was made, especially with regard to the theatre and concert hall. They're so beautiful, so monumental, yet so elegantly light. The lovely sweeping curves of the roof help create this effect, floating. The gorgeous decorative elements, clean lines and simplicity of the roof lines and columns. I've seen drawings of an earlier version of the 2 halls, and they were colored like the CKS Memorial Hall.
Oh, so you mean like they would have had blue roofs and white walls?
Yes, blue roofs, white walls. But it was thought it would be a bit too monotonous, and they went with the more traditional decorative elements and coloring. And the result? 2 timeless classics, continuing thousands of years of Chinese tradition.
The National Theatre and Concert Hall buildings are not just inspired by historical architecture in general, or in a general sense, but by specific buildings in the Forbidden City. The Forbidden City is the palace complex there, right in the heart of Beijing, the imperial city, and it's where the emperor and the imperial court lived and worked. It was constructed in the early Ming Dynasty, so that's the early 1400s. Among the many buildings in the Forbidden City, you've got the Hall of Supreme Harmony, which was the inspiration for the concert hall. And the theater was based on the Hall of Preserving Harmony.
Right, so the concert hall and theater in Taipei, based on 2 buildings in the Forbidden City in Beijing. And not just dating back to the 1400s, but really those designs were not new at the time of the Ming. The design of the buildings go back 2,000 years to the Han Dynasty, and they encapsulate the basic design of Chinese architecture through the millennia. Because whether it's a temple or a palace or a house, all Chinese buildings are basically the same. You have a single-story rectangular wooden building, a sloping roof with eaves.
Eaves, or in other words, the roof part that extends past the walls. And your point about the underlying simplicity of Chinese architecture is worth repeating. You said almost every building is a single-story rectangular wooden building.
Yes, Although the National Theatre and Concert Hall were built with concrete and reinforced steel and actually broke many kinds of construction records in Taiwan in that process, when we look at them, we should really visualize their wooden predecessors.
Those originals in Beijing's Forbidden City, they were wooden buildings other than the tiles on their roofs. And many of the visual aspects of the two buildings in Taipei, they reflect this wooden origin.
Yeah, so there's a basic wooden frame of columns and beams, and these wooden parts were joined by clever carpentry, clever joints, no iron nails. So you have carpenters making joints which lock the pieces together.
And these joints were supported by brackets.
Yes, and we can see these brackets under the eaves. So that part of the roof that extends outward, these brackets, colored and intricately carved, they're very decorative, but they serve a structural support function. And the colorful eaves and colorful brackets, again, the color is a legacy of Chinese wooden construction. In the early days, wood was painted to protect it from decay and pests. Later on, it would become more about aesthetics, but protection early on.
If you look carefully at the roofs, the lower ridge lines positioned at the corners of the roof, there are figurines representing mythical creatures. Ancient Chinese homes had these too, but not so many. So what are these creatures doing there?
They're protective creatures, and this practice comes from the ancient concern of wooden structures being susceptible to fires. And these creatures were believed to ward off disasters and protect the dwelling. And some of these roof creatures, these little statues, are an immortal riding a phoenix, a dragon, a phoenix. They love their dragons and phoenixes, don't they? A lion, a celestial horse, a seahorse, and various fish.
So the Memorial Hall was completed in 1980, and the National Theatre and Concert Hall completed in 1987. The whole project spanned a period of more than a decade, and it started when architect Mr. Yang was in his early 60s.
At least he enjoyed a long retirement. Yang Cho-cheng, this master architect, passed away in 2006 at the age of 91 or 92.
So, John, you are clearly a fan of the two halls, the concert hall and the theater. How do you feel about the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Hall?
It's certainly striking, but such a large space to commemorate a single man?
Yeah, and some might say it celebrates Chinese culture, but we've also got to say that its promotion in Taiwan went alongside the suppression of Taiwanese culture, the Taiwanese language, for example, and of course the suppression of all political opposition.
Yes, politics aside, do you like the Memorial Hall?
I feel pretty much the same as you. I would like to be able to separate it from the person venerated on the inside, but the outside is stunning and beautiful, and yeah, I like it. It's maybe a bit over the top, but overall I like it. It's
huge, as is the bronze statue of Chiang Kai-shek in the upper level hall.
Yeah, massive building on a massive pedestal. There are two sets of white stairs, each with 89 steps to represent Chiang Kai-shek's age at the time of his death, leading up to the main entrance.
89 steps. Some listeners might be thinking, hey, didn't he die when he was 87?
But get your abacus out, John. Time for some traditional Chinese counting.
Right, so by Chinese reckoning, you're a year old when you're born, and you add another going past Chinese New Year, is that right?
Yeah, that is the traditional thing. But as for the design of the CKS Memorial, there were several influences. So one would be the mausoleum in Nanjing for the founder of the Republic of China, Dr. Sun Yat-sen. And if people want to, they can get online and look at the Wikipedia page. It's an impressive thing to look at. It's also really interesting to see the KMT emblem emblazoned all over it. And this is in China. So the other influence would be the Temple of Heaven in Beijing from the Ming Dynasty. And then you have the Taj Mahal in India. And then finally, the seated Chiang Kai-shek statue is very similar in many ways to the statue of Abraham Lincoln, right, at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. And turning back to the two halls, the concert and the theater, The cost of the buildings was close to $250 million US dollars, and at that time, that really was just a mind-boggling amount of money.
It was an epic project and a lot of things being done for the first time. The construction process faced various challenges, such as building the foundations. The original soil was soft, requiring the use of a special foundation design.
And you can see the costs in the scale and quality of the buildings. For example, the lobby of the Chinese theater is exquisite. Beautiful curved staircases, chandeliers, decorated walls and ceiling.
And the chandeliers, those fancy ornamental lights. Yeah, the word chandelier, I just looked it up. It's from the French candle holder. There are 36 chandeliers in total in the two buildings. No candles, but instead the chandeliers are studded with crystals imported from the renowned Austrian company Swarovski. How do you say that?
Swarovski, yeah.
Anyway, the opulence of a European palace.
Oh man, those crystals must have been expensive. Okay, well, another example of not looking to save money in any way was the use of marble. Taiwan, as some people know, has beautiful marble from the East Coast area. If you drive over there, you will see trucks carrying big slabs of it from quarries. But for this project in Taipei, they did not use local, cheaper marble. They used marble from Italy.
In fact, they liked the Italian marble so much they bought an entire marble quarry in Italy. The raw stone was shipped to a factory in Hualien where it was cut and polished and then sent to the construction site.
Okay, so the obvious question, why not use marble found in Taiwan, right?
Because the color wasn't quite right. Taiwan marble tends to be grayish-white in color, and it was thought it would have too cold, too solemn a feeling. So they went with this Italian yellowish marble for its warmer color to create a warm and pleasant atmosphere.
Okay. It's fair to say just, physically the buildings are magnificent inside and out. But when it comes to performance venues, it's not just the outside that matters, of course. Acoustics, right, are make or break. And here, Taiwan was building something that had never been seen in the country before.
Indeed. For the acoustics, as with the stage lighting and other advanced technical aspects, there was assistance from a group of experts from Germany and the Netherlands.
There was testing done at various stages and changes made. For one of the final tests, the help of several thousand students were enlisted. In the late summer of 1987, about a month before the official launch, 2,200 students from a vocational college filled up the concert hall, and then 1,500 students from the same school went to the National Theater.
Yeah, real people were needed. The absorption and reflection of sound is different when a venue has an audience. And of course, there's noise from the audience.
So this is a month before opening. They're still doing this kind of testing. I guess they were still nervous.
Absolutely. People were on edge. The formal opening ceremony took place on October 31st, 1987 at the National Theatre. There was a Peking opera performance. And at the National Concert Hall, some patriotic music, Ode to China, sung by the Chiang Kai-shek Memorial Choral Symphony. These performances were for invited dignitaries, both local and foreign.
And did you note the date there, John? Halloween?
Yes, also
The birthday of Chiang Kai-shek.
Exactly.
I don't think that was a coincidence.
You're so cynical.
Then there was this opening season of performances for the public, and that included some big foreign acts. These had been worked out well in advance. So as the buildings were nearing completion, consideration had turned to what performances should showcase the opening season. They obviously want to kick off with something impressive, something famous, something foreign. And they want to make a statement, Taipei, we are an international performing arts center now.
Okay, so they need to choose some music, and they decide something American, something big. And the honor of being the first Western company to play the National Theatre, they came up with the New York City Opera.
Okay, so opera, that means it's going to play in the theater building. The auditorium seats 1,500 as opposed to the concert hall's 2,000 plus seat auditorium.
Right. And after choosing who's going to play, they need to decide what will be performed. They wanted 2 popular operas. They chose La Bohème.
By what? Puccini?
Puccini. And La Traviata.
By Verdi, right?
Mm-hmm.
2 Italian masterpieces and audience favorites.
And they chose Student Prince, an operetta with a story set in Germany but performed in English. And the Taiwanese insisted on getting the top-rank singers who had performed in New York recently. They wanted the very best quality.
This is a huge undertaking, incredibly expensive. The New York City Opera entourage, transported at a cost of over $2 million.
Just a note, it was very unusual because of cost for the New York City Opera to go overseas. This was the first time they'd done it in decades.
And taking an opera company, a group of 225 people halfway across the world, it was newsworthy. The good news was that the performances in Taipei were a great success. The January and February 1988 issue of the British specialist magazine Q Technical Theatre Review had a feature article full of praise, with the following concluding statement, quote, "To have achieved either such a concert hall or such a theater would have been a tremendous achievement. But to have achieved both is, well, really rather incredible." Unquote.
And the March 1988 issue of the American magazine Opera News ran a feature story titled A Better Home Abroad, as in better than their home facilities in New York.
So those were some pretty awesome reviews for the 2 halls. And if you guys are enjoying the podcast, do us a favor and give us some awesome reviews on
Nice.
Apple Podcast. We would like 5 stars. Well, I think we have them, but we'd like to keep them there. And of course, you can go to our website, formosafiles.com. You can also leave a review there. Thank you so much for listening. And we've got a part 2 coming very soon, where we're going to talk about more stuff related to the buildings and also how much history they witnessed.
You've been listening to Formosa Files. I'm John Ross.
I'm Eric Michael Smith.